Hi, I'm Jo Bailey and welcome to my channel where I talk about all things brain. This video is part of my psychiatric profile playlist where I, as a forensic trained clinical psychologist, look at some interesting people, criminals, politicians and celebrities to try and make sense of some of their crazy behaviours and crimes. This video is part 2 of my series, 5 Things That Make No Sense with the Chris Watts case. And today I'm talking about Chris Watts' father, Ronnie Watts, and trying to make sense of some of the things we see in his police interviews. Be sure to check out part 1 of this series if you've not seen it yet, or if you're unsure about the story or background, and I'll put a link to that here. So let's jump right in and start by taking a quick look at Ronnie Watts, learning for the very first time of the magnitude of the events. And then I'll come back and talk through some of this with you. Now, before you watch this video clip, remember Ronnie, up until this point, believes that Shenan and the girls are just missing. He's about to be told by Chris that they are all dead. Now, we do know that Chris lied to his father in this video and told him that Shenan suffocated the girls, and he, Chris, simply lost his mind in rage and killed Shenan. Of course, we now know that's not true, but even so, here is Ronnie hearing that his daughter-in-law, his 3 grandbabies are all dead, and his son, in retaliation, has committed murder. So have a look at his response to this unimaginably horrific news.
Tell us no wrong anything, or it's polygraph failed it. Yeah, because there's just too much emotions. So I mean, they're not gonna let me go. Is there any reason why they shouldn't? It's not they know I had an affair. And they know. I can't think about that. They know you had an affair. Anything else you want to tell me? What's going on? Or what happened or anything? Or you know anything about it? When we had that conversation that morning, it was emotional. It was told her about separation and everything like that. Mm-hmm. What happened after that? I mean, I went downstairs. I want to protect her. What? I want to protect her. You don't want to protect her? I don't know what else to say. Huh? She hurt him? Yeah. And well, no, I forgot about her. You hurt her? Did they leave after that for a long time? So she started hurting the kids. Ever. Oh, you guys want to? One. She smelled it. Or choking. I didn't hear anything. When I was downstairs, they came back up and they were gone. I don't know, like me talking to her about that. Talking to her about separation and everything, about she lost. I don't know, like, what else to say, like, I freaked out. Those are my kids. So she, that one time, you were leaving the place and going to work. And she freaked out over the separation from them.
Like, she laid back down, but that's not downstairs. But I heard like a little commotion upstairs, but I didn't think anything of it.
And then you went back upstairs and she was...
Never. I can see, like, she's not.
Choking her, or did she kill her?
They're blue.
Both of them. She choked both of them to death.
I forgot the same thing. How was it though?
No,
I couldn't like call cops about it.
so no one to be all the bodies off or something?
I mean, I didn't know what else to do. I freaked out. I didn't know nothing else to do. I didn't know what to do.
So she killed those she choked them to death. You lost it and choke her, or
That's just rage. I hadn't.
So what do you think about that? How do we make sense of Ronnie's response to hearing about what his son has just confessed he has done? Now, I've read a lot of responses about Ronnie's reaction, and I myself had some feelings about his reaction too. But the main criticisms or the observations that I've seen is that 1, Ronnie is emotionless, just like Chris, and some have even accused them both of being sociopaths. 2, that Ronnie must have known something, mainly about the affair or covering for Chris in some way, lying to police about this in the interview. And the 3rd one is that I've seen Ronnie being attacked for his immediate and his ongoing support of Chris. Indeed, Ronnie's support of his son has elicited a lot of criticism and continues to. Even hatred from the public, with comments labelling the whole Watts family as sociopaths. So we're going to unpack all of this in this video, and I want to mention that I have spent several weeks now researching this, many days specifically looking into Ronnie, and indeed I have spent hours completing a very thorough behavioural and voice analysis of the police interviews with Ronnie, and you are going to hear my results, my opinion on this. So the first question I'm going to answer directly is, was Ronnie being dishonest and or covering for Chris in any way in these police interviews? And my answer is definitely no, he was not. The police actually took a really big gamble when they agreed to let Ronnie into the interrogation room. They knew that Ronnie could walk in there and give Chris his rights and say, Chris, don't talk anymore. Stop talking and let's lawyer up. In which case, Chris could have essentially walked out of there that night. At that point, at least, he was not under arrest. So the police really took a big gamble, but the gamble paid off because it was Ronnie himself who elicited the confession from Chris. I mean, if Chris had have walked out that night, I'm confident it would not have been long before the police came knocking and looking for him. There was mounting evidence, and I'm pretty confident the CBI knew from the outset that Chris was lying. But getting that early confession meant a quick recovery of the bodies, which is integral to a conviction. It also meant no wasted time of police resources or disintegration of other evidence. So Ronnie might have done things very differently in hindsight if he had his time over. I don't know, but I do know that Ronnie should actually be credited with the swift arrest of Chris. So thanks for that, Ronnie. So I think everyone agrees that Ronnie's behaviour is very interesting. It's certainly not how I would imagine I would respond in such a situation, but it is a grave error to assume that we all react the same or should react a certain way. What I can determine from the video is that Ronnie was always going to support his son, no matter what. And that was a sentiment echoed by the Watts family later in court when they delivered their victim impact statement.
We have loved you from the beginning, and we still love you now. As the Lord said in Jeremiah 3:31, I have loved you with an everlasting love. Therefore, I have continued my faithfulness to you. And you, as your mother, Chris, I have always loved you, and I still do. We love you. And we forgive you, son.
Chris, I want to talk to you as a father and son. The Bible says if we confess our sins, God is faithful and just and will forgive us. Chris, I forgive you, and your sister forgives you, and we will never abandon you, and we love you. Dad.
But the first thing Ronnie does before a single word is uttered is place his hand on his son's shoulder. Now, this action is very revealing to me. And throughout the video, you see this same sustained support from Ronnie. But keep in mind, at this time, Ronnie actually thought his son had witnessed the murder of his own children. And Ronnie genuinely believed that. So I guess at this point, Ronnie's support of Chris makes sense. But it's his lack of emotion that people are questioning, and I will get to that in just a moment. What you might not realise is that Ronnie had also been primed by Chris a few weeks earlier when Chris went to North Carolina for the last week of Shenan's vacation. Chris had told his father whilst he was there that he and Shenan were separating. Their relationship was under pressure, that they had agreed to sell the family home, and that Chris had fallen out of love with Shenan and was going to be getting a divorce from his wife. The Watts family never really liked Shenan from the start, and in some instances they probably had good reason. Shenan had been married before, which is in some conservative Christian families not really appreciated. She was a rather dominating personality. She had previously threatened to remove their grandchildren from them. She had prevented them from seeing their grandbabies at least 1 or 2 times that I'm aware of previously. She'd accused Cindy of trying to kill her youngest daughter, otherwise known as Nutgate, which is a whole other story with little merit actually. And from Shenan's own admission, she wore the pants in the home. Shenan clearly enjoyed attention, and from my research it seems she could be indeed a rather vengeful person when she wanted to be. She had some features of being controlling and vindictive at times, none of which warrants her being killed, and I'm not victim bashing here. God knows, I am all those things at times too. But for Ronnie and Cindy, this was just more proof that Chris was the victim in this relationship, which of course is not true. If you're not happy in a relationship, you leave. You don't kill your family. Anyway, I said Chris had planned to kill his wife and children at least a couple of weeks before he actually did so. And as part of the preparation and the priming for his murder, he wrote a letter whilst he was up in North Carolina on that last week or so of the vacation. And he said that if anything happens to him or the kids, for whoever was reading the letter, to look at Shenan. So he had already done some good groundwork and some manipulation, further manipulation of his family when he wrote that letter, which sort of helps us understand why Ronnie was so able to easily believe Chris's story. Chris's story being that Shenan had murdered the babies and he responded in retaliation. So when we see this immediate reassurance and support from Ronnie at the police station, it does make sense. Now, it doesn't mean that it's right, but it makes sense. But let's dissect this a little further. Even believing the story that Shenan had killed the children and in a fit of blind rage, as Chris called it, he did the same thing to her. Is Ronnie's response normal? Is he emotionless and sociopathic like Chris, as some have suggested? And my answer is again, no, that's not correct. Ronnie is old school, and I can assure you I see many patients, many male patients in my practice, men that think concealing their emotion means being stoic and strong at all times. This behaviour is certainly not unusual, and especially in the older age group. Ronnie himself says he has always struggled showing his emotions, so no doubt growing up, Chris would have learned some of this directly and vicariously from his father. And Ronnie defends Chris's lack of emotions because of this, suggesting that Chris is just like him in many ways, and Chris is just struggling emotionally, doesn't like to show his emotions. And this is perhaps why people have labelled them both sociopaths. But I want to make it very clear that Ronnie's struggle with the expression of emotions is very different to Chris's inability to experience emotions. Now, let me repeat that point. Expression of emotion is not the same as lack of emotions. When Chris did the press interview the next day after murdering his family, there was no struggle with emotions. He had no emotions. In a letter from prison to Sherilyn Cadell, speaking of disposing the body of one of his babies, he says, "I couldn't believe how easy it was just to let her drop through the hole and let her go. I heard the splash when she hit the oil." That is an example of someone who has no emotions. So if Chris can fake grief after what he did, and after a comment like that, he probably could fake being a loving father and husband too. Chris learned how to fake emotions by mirroring others. And yes, his dad would have been someone that he mirrored growing up, but we are dealing with something different with Chris. I have watched Chris engaging in this mirroring behavior over and over again so overtly as I've been researching for this. And when someone smiles, he smiles. When someone laughs, he laughs. When someone says he should cry, he cries. It's so counterfeit and so obvious to me. Even at the police station, 2 days after killing his family, he doesn't shed a tear until the CBI officer, Tammy Lee, basically tells him that's what he should be doing. She puts some photos of his children in front of him and challenges him. If this was me, I would be in panic. I would be in tears. She says, "Those were your babies." Now, not long in the same interview, Chris starts to cry and he expresses those exact words. "Those were my babies." He's learning, he's mirroring. And I think later Chris even acknowledges that Tammy Lee put the idea into his head that he retaliated after Shenan had killed the babies. So he is all about watching and mirroring. Word for word, the instruction and emotion that Tammy Lee gave to him was later mirrored. Now, I don't want to get off topic, but that is a really typical sociopathic technique to learn how you are meant to respond and then essentially fake it. The point is, Ronnie doesn't do this at all. Ronnie, whilst not responding with any degree of predictable emotion or emotion that we would expect to see, is genuinely upset and genuinely shocked. Now, I know this because I've analysed his voice and his body language very carefully. Ronnie is not one to let his emotions rule. He leads with his head. He wants to be cool, he wants to be calm and rational. But how do you be rational in this kind of situation? He's confused and he's shocked, and we see it when he continually touches his mouth or his head. And we see him touching and moving paper or objects on the desk for no apparent reason. We can see that he is uncomfortable with his own emotional state and he's looking for an outlet for them, but there really isn't one. So he focuses on soothing Chris, his first priority when he entered the room. We also hear Ronnie repeating what Chris is telling him. This happens throughout the entire police interview, and this is Ronnie's way of trying to process what he is hearing and at the same time trying to control his emotions. Ronnie has his head down a lot, and so does Chris, but Chris is hiding and Ronnie is hurting. The only time we really see Chris lift his head and raise his voice, something we call a behavioural spike, is when the detective is trying to get Chris to reveal the location of the children. And he pleads with Chris's emotions and he says, "Tell me where they are so we can get them out of the cold."
You can help you get them out of the cold.
We see Chris lift his head, he raises his voice a little and he looks at the detective and he says,
They're gone. There's no bringing them back.
So that technique that the detective used was an emotional one that would cause a normal person to respond from a place of emotion, from guilt, remorse or penance, a concern for someone else. But you see, that doesn't work on Chris. Chris responds better to the sympathy, the poor you, the rubbing, the consoling, which, by the way, is the technique that Tammy Lee, the female officer, used, and that worked quite effectively. Chris is all about him. Through the crime and through this interview, it's always, from Chris's point, been about Chris. After Chris confesses to dumping the bodies, you hear him ask, "What's going to happen now?"
What's going to happen? We're going to help them get out of there.
And the male officer replies, he says, "We're going to get them out of there," referring to the girls in the oil tanks. But that's not what Chris meant. Chris meant, "What's going to happen to me?" We also see Chris engaging in the mirror cry in response to retrieving the bodies from the work site. And he redundantly asks, what are his work colleagues going to think of him? What are they going to think of me? They think I'm a good guy. What will they think of me now?
Would you prefer them when you're one of your coworkers? Oh my God, no. I can't have that. You said it. You're about to become a good man. They're gonna see this. You're like, what the fuck did you do, Chris? Let's just go to house to begin with.
So with Chris, his emotions are not real. He has no genuine concern or remorse other than when it impacts him. With Ronnie, he does have emotions and his focus is not on himself. His focus is on someone else, even if that other person in this instance is Chris. So Chris has no emotions. Ronnie has them, but he represses them and he controls them. They are not the same in this regard. Ronnie's priority in these interviews was to support his son. Whether his son deserved that support or not is questionable, but I'm very confident that watching this, Ronnie is hurting. Chris, however, is hurting only for himself. As for the accuracy of Ronnie's comments throughout the confession and subsequent interview that he did with police, my assessment is that Ronnie was being honest in all regards. I saw no evidence or body language leakage to suggest he was being deceptive or even omitting the truth in any way. So that in itself suggests that Ronnie did not know about the affair. Now, I don't think there's anyone suggesting that Ronnie knew about Chris committing the murders. If so, you can definitely rule that one out. But we're now 3 years later and Ronnie is still supporting his son. He's now been exposed to a preponderance of the evidence. He's now had the full story revealed as to what happened and that his son is actually responsible for the violent murder of all of them. He's had time to go over things in his mind. He's had the opportunity of processing all that's occurred, and yet he and the family still support Chris. Somehow though, Ronnie seems to have returned to his original belief that Shenan was responsible in some way, and this is Ronnie absolving Chris of the crime. And I think that makes a lot of people angry. There are also videos of Chris's sister visiting him in jail, which suggests that she also believes him, or at the very least is supporting him, irrespective of what he has done. In that video, the two chat rather casually as though one day things will be okay again. It is quite an odd video to watch. If you haven't seen that, I'll put a link here for you to have a look. It's an unusual one too, and it sort of reflects what we see happening throughout all of the Watts family. But getting back to Ronnie, the initial shock, albeit very contained and controlled, that we saw in the police videos from Ronnie is genuine, in my opinion. And shock is functional. It protects us. It gives us space and it gives us time to process the gravity of an event. But it does wear off with time. And as it wears off, we are forced to face the magnitude of the incident that shocked us. And that's when anger might emerge, or resentment, or pain, or forgiveness. Something happens. Shock gives way to something. But Ronnie's shock seems to have given way to denial. Just like shock, denial is a protective emotion. It's a defense mechanism. It's a way of avoiding something that is too hard to deal with. And I really don't think it can get much harder than this. Ronnie's denial is what makes a lot of people angry. But remember that Ronnie also lost 3 grandbabies, and he lost a son also in some ways. And I can't begin to imagine how I would cope in that situation. I can't feel anything but sorrow for the man. Now, I know some people are going to disagree with me, and that's okay. What I'm trying to do is explain this from a theoretical background based in psychological practice. And if we're going to be completely fair, Ronnie has some real and valid reasons to have had problems with Shenan. He has his own emotional challenges. He was brought up in a certain way, and he spent a lifetime being stoic and strong. And he also had a sociopathic son who has intentionally manipulated him, and a deep and powerful desire to believe what Chris is saying to be true. The alternative for Ronnie, and indeed the whole Watts family, is just too much to face. And I think it's a very dangerous and erroneous conclusion to blame the Watts family for the actions of Chris, or even to judge them for their position in persisting in their love and support of their son. Would I do the same thing if I was in Cindy Watts' position? Truth is, I don't know. I really can't say. I can't imagine. I can't begin to presume to know what that would be like. So I try not to judge. But is it unusual and peculiar to me? To me, yes, it is. Are they misguided in their denial and their ongoing support? Possibly, but that's not sociopathy and that's not a crime. So to summarize here, Chris does have some features of his emotionality that probably came from his father. Does that mean Ronnie is the sociopath? Absolutely not. I have hopefully made it clear in this video that struggling to express emotions is very different from having no emotions. Was Ronnie 100% honest in his interviews? My impression, based on my analysis, is yes, he was. Is Ronnie to blame for Chris turning out the way that he did? No, he is not. Now, the Watts family are Christians, so I want to end with a verse from the Bible that they believe in. This is from Ezekiel chapter 18, verse 14. In the end, everybody has to stand before the judgment seat of Christ on the merits of his own work. The justification that one is a victim of his parents may be true to a degree, but everyone must account for his own actions. I hope this helped make sense of Ronnie Watts' actions, as peculiar as they may be. Denial is a very real psychological phenomenon, and as I said, it is not a crime. We need to remember that the only criminal and the only one with blood on their hands in this story is Chris Watts. In video 3 of this series, I'll look at another element of the case that makes no sense, and that is, of course, Nicole Kessinger and some of her lies and her role in all of this. So join me in that next video where I will see if I can make any sense of Nicole's lies and behaviours. I hope to see you there. Bye for now. If you found this video to be helpful, then please consider liking or subscribing to my channel. That allows me more opportunity to provide free content for you. Until next time, take care of yourselves and each other and have a very happy and peace-filled day. Bye now.